my sound should be up and running, so I should be connecting pretty soon. Yeah, there I am. So just make sure my microphone. Don't know what happened. I think the connection just got and it just was difficult getting it back. But I should be okay now. Let me just move this off that screen and push this one across to this screen, and we will be good to go. Okay, so hi everybody, hope you're all well. The sound, hopefully the sound should be coming through now. Yeah, okay, audio's on, there's an echo. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know what happened. My connection, I think, got loose with the microphone, and then when I tried to put it into the casting software, it just wouldn't work, and I had to close it down and start it. But okay, we're up and running. Okay, good stuff. Okay, so let me just bring up my other screen here. I just want to make sure that I have view on watch page, and I'll be good to go. Just yeah, so. And okay, perfect. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at the third application, which is to send by email using VBA. Now, what normally happens in VBA, whenever you get to, say, do a report or something like that, it's often very useful to have an email kind of application attached to it, so that if the user looks at a report, they can click on a button on a spreadsheet, and what it will do is it will take the report and it will email somebody. And because this is quite a common task, it's very useful to have it automated and to have an email component. So that's what we're going to look at today. So what we have here is we have just a very simple sheet. So there's not much on the worksheet, just basically here we have what we'd say is a list of recipients. Now, what we have also is we have this, which is our food data worksheet. And what we're going to do is just simply send this food data worksheet to the user. So when someone clicks on send OK, it gets sent to the, basically, so it will get sent straight to the user or the recipient or list of recipients that we've put down. So let me just go there now. So if we look at what we have here, so send email, whatever. So let's press send email and just let's kick that off. And so it just runs a bit slow on this because it's running the Workcast software. So what that does is that sends an email. Now that sent one to my account. So I'll just open that email here. And when I open that email, what we'll be able to see is that the email should have arrived with the actual, now it should be coming in here. So let me just bring that across. So this is the actual email here. So what you can see is that it says test subject, test body, and it has the attachment of the food data. So it's not, so this is quite different than a lot of Excel applications in that it's not quite visible. But what you can see is that it's providing like a nice result. So it's sending the worksheet to somebody. So, and when it finishes, then it just says the email has been successfully sent. And so that's essentially, in a nutshell, what the application is doing. But the application is very useful because, so this is just the worksheet that it sent. So the application is very useful because basically once you write the code to send a worksheet, you can basically like use that code anywhere. So basically like it's the same worksheet that you use. So, or it's the same code that you used like to send maybe one or more attachments and so on and so forth. Because with an email, you're always going to have a subject, you're always going to have a body. You may or may not have an attachment. You'll always obviously have one or more recipients. So once you write this code, you can essentially use this code pretty much anywhere. So what we're going to do then is we're going to look at the code itself. So if I just bring across the code here, and you can see, so these are the files that we have with the VBA handbook. Now what we do is we take the template file like this and we just copy and paste it. And so what we'll do then is we'll just use the send mail. And then we can use this then as our template. So let's go ahead and look inside this. So let's just enable the content here. And I'm just going to make it a bit smaller. I'm just going to bring it into the center of the screen like this. So we'll just open up the Visual Basic Editor. And there you can see. So what we have essentially, I just want to make it a bit smaller because I'm using this on a bigger screen. So let me just put it like this. So what we start off with as normal is we have our click events module. Now the click events module, so I've gone through this on a number of occasions, but essentially the click events is where we hold the subs that run when someone clicks on a button. And we call them click events because they're an event that are kicked off when we click. Now what we do in the click events is we keep all the subs from the button here, but we don't put any code in them. All we do is call another sub. So this makes it very easy to basically, if we decide that we want to change the buttons, or we decided we wanted maybe to kick it off from a ribbon, or we decided we want to kick it off from a worksheet event, it's very easy to go in and just remove these events and change them around. And also, once we keep them all in one module and group them together, it's very easy for us to go there and say, okay, these are all our events to do with click events. So what's going to happen is that so we have the sub here, create and send email. Now this sub, create and send email,
and just bring all this across the microphone. So this is the sub for rows.
Now let me just hide these down here. So this is the one that's going to do the main part of our application. And we keep this in send sheet. Now what we do when we start off in any of these applications is we always turn on the functionality or turn off the functionality and then turn it back on again. So we can just start off doing this. So we turn it off at the start, and then at the end what we're going to do is we're going to turn it back on. Yeah, sorry John, you were just saying if there's no, I think most people have sound now. I had a bit of a problem at the start. If you just try and refresh the page, if the sound isn't working, just try and refresh the page and the sound should be okay. I mean, I'll just check it here on my one. We always turn on the functionality. And yeah, I can get the sound through YouTube here. So just try and refresh this, just F5 and try and refresh the page and hopefully it'll come through. So we turn off the functionality and at the end then we turn it back on. So just like this. And now we have the two functions down here, or the two subs. And what we can do with these, like we normally, like I have them here because we're only doing one thing in this application. But what we would normally do is we'd have a module like utils. And this is a public module where you put subs that will be called by many different places. They're kind of general utilities. And what's a good idea then is to put these in there so that they're separated from what we're doing with the email. So they're separated, they're not part of any specific application, but everybody can access them. Now of course we just have to make them public then. So these are quite useful. So if you have other things, like if you have a sort, say for collection or a sort for arrays, you could put it in here where it will be accessible to kind of everybody. So it's kind of like a public function. So that's basically the start of any application. We have our click events. So when we click on a button, it will come in here and then it will turn off the functionality and turn it back on. So let's put a message box in here just so that we know that it worked. And what the message box does then is it pops up when we know that it's gone through the different stages. So we can, let me click this. So we'll click the button here. When we click send mail, it will go into our click event, which is here. And then our click event will call our other application. So let's just run through this. So I click send email and you can see that it went straight into our click event. So if we step into this, so we can just step in using the icons here, or we can press F8. Okay, John, you've got sound now. Yeah, I'm not sure, Mark, why it's not working. I have Chrome here as well, and the sound is on it. Yeah, if you put the resolution up to the last, if you can't see the resolution that well, just put it up to the highest, and it should be crystal clear at the highest resolution. So we're in create and send email, and we're just stepping into it. So we step into it. And you can see that we just basically step. Now we're going to step over this because we don't need to step into the functionality. And as I said, step over. Okay, we can just step out because it stepped into it there. And we can just step over this. And you can see that it brought up our message box. And that said it worked. And then it does the last one. And then we'll just run it on to the end. So we have a very simple structure again, but we know that it's working so far. So we can go to the next phase. So we break this down essentially into messages, and the first thing we want to do is we want to get the recipients. So what we do as we're doing, so I said break down into messages, but what I mean is we break this down into the different parts that we want to do. So a lot of times when people start with VBA, they kind of put a ton of code into one big module, but it's much better and much more structured if you break it down into modules and you kind of let each module do its own thing. And then what's good about those is that if you've got errors, you can isolate the errors, but also kind of build your application one step at a time. So it's like kind of if you're building a house and you were doing one room at a time, it's kind of a similar idea. You just start with one part, make sure that that's right, and then move to the next part. So we get the recipients. Once we have the recipients, we want to check that there is at least one of them, because if there isn't, we're not going to send the email, and we're not going to create the attachment file. Now, however, if it does exist, so if there is at least one or more recipients, we'll create the attachment. Then we'll send the email, which is kind of the main part of the application, we'll say, and then we'll delete the file. So, and then at the end, we turn off the functionality as normal. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to get the recipients. So what we're going to do is we're going to store the recipients in a collection. So a collection is basically, it's a group of items. It's kind of like an array, but it's much simpler. And we basically, all we use the collection for in VBA is simply to add items and to remove items. So it doesn't really do a lot. The functionality on it was kind of very limited. So it's good for kind of simple things like this. So I'm using it instead of an array. And the reason is that if you get back one item with an array, the array isn't a two-dimensional array. It's not an array if one item comes back. So basically you have to check how many items there is. And if it's only one, you have to create the array yourself. Otherwise, you just read it to the array. So it's a little bit messy. So that's why a collection is kind of nice to use here. So we'll just define our collection here. And what we're going to do is we're going to get it back from a sub called get recipients. So we set the call equals get recipients. And what that will do is that will return us a collection. So we don't know what it's doing. As far as this function is concerned, we're going to get back a collection of email addresses. And it's as far as this sub is concerned, it's none of its business. It's up to get recipients to provide it with the list. And so we're kind of compartmentalizing what we're doing here. And again, if we have another application within this workbook that needs to get the recipients, we can call the same get recipients sub. So we don't need to write the code again. So what people tend to do is they'd write a big bunch of code and just put it all in one place. And then if they wanted to get the recipients again, they'd copy and paste the same code. But that kind of makes your code really messy, and it makes it very, very inflexible. And also, if you decide to change how you get the recipients, then you need to go and you basically need to go and make changes to your code everywhere. And so this is definitely not ideal, because imagine, for example, that you had 10 reports and you're using this code in 10 places. So you're always striving to, what you really want to do is always just have one bit of code. If you have one bit of code doing something, that's always like ideal. So anyway, let's get on to this. So I'm going to move this up the screen so that we can see it. So let me just enter down. So that's one thing. Sometimes when you're writing in VBA, you might get near the bottom of the screen. So you basically have to press enter just to get down the screen. It's not like another editor where you can just like move it down. You basically have to use enter to bring the lines down the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the outline of our get recipient function. So our get recipients works like this. So let me just take it. I'll take the name from here. So a function, first of all, is the same as a sub, essentially, except that it returns a value. So if we want to return something, we use function. And we're going to return, as we said, a collection. So now that we know that we're going to return a collection, before we even worry about how we're going to go about doing it and so on, what we do is we can say, let's return the collection, because we know we're going to be returning a collection at the end. So let's return the collection. And we don't have the collection yet, so let's create the collection. So we're creating a new collection. We're going to do stuff with it here, and we're going to return it. So this means we've already written this code without having to think about what we're doing. So now we can get on to the next part. So now we want to read into the actual collection that we've just created. And so what we want to do is we want to read from the send mail. So send mail is where we have a recipient. So this is the worksheet here. We have it called sent email. Now, if we look in here, you can see that each worksheet, it's normally something like sheet 1. But here you can see that there's two names. So the name in parentheses is the worksheet name. So it's the name at the bottom of the worksheet. But the name on the left-hand side is what we call the code name. And we can use the code name to refer to the worksheet directly. So we can just use it like this, as long as the code is in the same workbook. So what we want to do, we'll come back to this in one moment. What we want to do is we want to get the last row. So we want to get the last row on the sheet. Now we could use current region, but in this case I wanted to use this last row because sometimes current region isn't appropriate. So it's useful to use it, to know how to use last row. And how we use last row is basically, the code might look a bit overly complex, but it's also like pretty good, like. So let me just here. So it's quite similar, like it's the same that you use all the time. So if it freaks you out the first time, don't worry, it's pretty much the same. So we can use range or cells here. And what we use is, so we're going to use column E. So I've used a constant for column E. So that's this constant. And all this constant is basically this. It's just a string E. But when we look at our code, it's just really easy to see, okay, this is the column with the recipients. Now, if we change this in the future, we just have to make the change here, and the change then will work everywhere in our code. So Matthew, you're saying, could you also use the sheet name and not the code name for the sheet? Yeah, but you can't use the sheet name directly. So for example, if we wanted to use send email, we have to do this. We use this workbook and .worksheets, and then we put the name of it in here, and we'd say send email. So that would give us back the same thing. Now the problem, like, it's slightly more long-winded, but the problem is that if the user changes the worksheet name, it causes us a problem. So the code name is essentially like an ID. It's like, you know, whereas there's a customer ID. So say for example, so if you're say a customer in a shop and they have you down as with an ID. So if you come along and you say to them, you say, I want to change my address or I want to change my phone number. So they'll basically go into the record. So it'll be the same customer ID, but it'll just be your name or address that has changed. And so code name is essentially the same thing here. Now, it only works directly if the code is in the same workbook. If it's in a different workbook, then you have to refer to workbooks and worksheets. Okay, sorry, Ivan, you're saying you're out of focus. I'm not sure what you mean. It's yeah, if you try just setting the settings up to the highest, I mean the quality should be high enough, like, to see. If you just try that, it should be clear enough, like. Now, so we go down, we have the last row. So yeah, so we have the worksheet and then we have the range. And now what we want to do is we want to go to the very last cell. So what we're basically doing is going to the last cell and doing control key up. So the last cell is the send email. So it's send email sheet and it's rows.count. So this is giving us basically E, whatever million the cell is. And then from there we're basically doing a control up. So we do that like this. We do XL up and then we want to get back to row. So seems quite a bit long-winded, but that's kind of the standard way to get the last row. So that was the last row that we got. So what we do then when we get the last row is that we want to go from 2. So we say for I equals 2 to L last row. And this will bring us from 2 to whatever the last row. Now in this case, our last row is 2. So what we do is we go through each row, and then once we get to each row, we want to add. So as I said, the collection is quite so the collection is like very easy to use. You basically just say add and add the item that you want to add. So it has a key and stuff, but we don't need to use it. So again, we use send email. So cn send email, and then we'll say the range. And again, it's going to be the very same call email, and this time the row that we're in is going to be the row I, so whatever the current row is. Now we don't want to add the range. We don't want to add the range to our collection. We want to make sure we're just adding the string. So that's why we put value at the end here. So that brings us down to the end of this. And then at the end, what we should do is we should return the collection. So what we do is, the first thing, we want to do a debug compile. So with the debug compile, everything has worked fine. So our code is okay at the moment. And now if we go here and then click on send email, you can see that it goes in here. So let us just get rid of this breakpoint here. And when we run it through, it stops here. So what we do is we look at the collection in the watch window just to see what we've got. And if we look down here, you can see that it hasn't added any values so far. Sometimes that can happen. So maybe our last row didn't work as planned. So our last row was 1 there. So what we want to do then is we want to check here and just see, and we see that we haven't added in anything. So you see, always good to have a sanity check just to make sure that what we have so far is working. So let's put in the email address. Now if we run this again, it gets to set recipients equal call, and you can see this time that the collection is okay. So we look in here, and what we can see is that item 1, and we can see that it's read in the email address. And so we can just step on, but it's not going to do anything further here at this point because we haven't added any more code yet. So what we can also do is check that it's returned the collection correctly. And we can do it like this, so we can see that it has, and then we just finish. So far so good. What we've done is we've got the recipients back, we've read them from the worksheet. So far so good. So that was kind of a straightforward thing, but it's something that's very common to do in Excel. So what we want to do then is we want to add some code. So we want to check when the user gets back the set of collections. What we want to do is we want to check if they got back something. So if count equals 0, and let me just move this down a bit. So if count equals 0, so in other words, if we didn't read any recipients, we want to let the user know, because if we come back to this, say for example the recipients get deleted, or say we come back to this application in a month's time, we want to make sure that if we run it and nothing happens, we'll need to debug the code, or we'll need to figure out what the problem is. And the same when we give it to someone. But if we have the code that says what the problem is, then we can resolve it, or the person that we give the code to, they can also resolve it. So if they say there's no recipients, the email will not be sent, they can check the sheet. Now you could add other stuff there saying, in cell there should be recipients in this cell, please add recipients and try again, you know. So it depends on the application, but we always want our application doing something. So if it can't do what we want it to tell us that it can't do it and why, or we want it to tell us why it cannot do it, because that's quite important. Okay. Question about recipient. Yeah, so what you're saying there is so basically when you use range, you can use range like this. So if we use range like this, what happens is when we basically, if you add stuff like this, now not using the plus sign but using the ampersand sign, VBA figures out that you're trying to add two strings together, and it will convert the one to a string. So VBA, in most cases, VBA is actually smart enough to figure out what you're trying to do. So if you try and add a number to a string or something like that, or if the value you had was a string and you tried to assign it the number to a string, VBA will automatically convert it. So that's I mean, we could have also used cells to do it, when we could have had E as maybe being 5. So it depends really on what we're doing. Yeah. So it is Tomic, it is, it's the same as saying E ampersand 2 or E plus. Yes, you can use plus, but then you have to explicitly convert the number. Exactly. Okay, the portion is the desktop. Okay, let me just I'll make it full screen then, but I thought I might just make it too small. I think I might just make it a bit too small, but yeah, so it's plus, yeah, so it's one of those things. Yeah, if you're adding strings, always use the, or you're adding something that'll be a string, always use the ampersand. Otherwise you must explicitly state it. Okay, so there's no recipients. So we can put in, so in the actual handbook itself, I have this line that we can put in to say if there was a number of recipients. So at this point we can say, was there recipients or wasn't there recipients? So let's run this code again. And when we run the code, we should get a message of some description. oh, that's because, okay, I'm just using call here rather than call recipients. So if we run it on, it says the number of recipients is 1. Now let's try it again. So let's, just to see that it's working, what we do is we'll just move this recipient over here for a moment. And then we'll press send email again. There are no recipients, the email will not be sent. So we can see that works. So always good to try. Yeah, so sorry, Arvin, you were saying, so better quality in Internet Explorer as compared to Chrome. So yeah, maybe, yeah, if you're having difficulty, just try Chrome or try Internet Explorer and just see if it makes it, if it's just a bit better. Yeah, thanks, Arvin, for that. So far now. So the next thing that we want to do, so we've read our recipients, we're happy enough with all of that. And what we want to do next of all then is we want to create our attachment. So again, we're going to use the same kind of logic. So we'll get rid of our button here, or our message box. And what we want to do is we want to create the attachment, and we want to get the file name after it's created so that we can send it, basically. So this is just simply a string, and then we want the file name, and we want that to equal to, we'll say this workbook and path. Okay, now sorry, I'm jumping the gun here. This should be, so this should be create attachment. So create attachment again is going to be another function, because the reason it's a function is because it returns a value. So let's bring this guy down here, and we'll call this function create attachment, and what this returns then is a string, of course. And again, we can do it like we did the last one. We can start by saying, okay, let's create attachment. So that should be att, and that equals s file name. So s file name. Now, of course, we haven't defined our file name yet, so we just say, okay, so we need a variable file name at the start. So we're going to create a file name, and we're going to create the attachment and return that file name. So what we want to do to create the attachment then is essentially as follows. The first thing we want to do is create the file name. So we want to set whatever file name it's going to be. So the file name is, we're going to say it's going to be in the current. So this, it's always quite useful. It's only going to be a temporary file. We're going to delete it when it's finished. So we'll just put it in the current path. So that's this workbook and path property, and then we'll just add, and we'll call it food data. Now we could if we wanted. Normally, if we had a in a normal application, we'd have a constant for this, so that we could change the name if we wanted, or we could let the user decide. Well, actually, in this case, we wouldn't, because it's temporary. It doesn't matter what it's called. So that's the first thing. So we've got the name. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to add a workbook. So how we add a workbook is like how we open it. We use the workbooks collection, and instead of open then that we've seen before, we use add. So this creates a workbook. Now when we create the workbook, just like open, we want to place the value in some kind of workbook variable. So wk_temp equals. So we add the workbook, place it there, and again we can just go back then and say, okay, we need to create the workbook. So we've got the workbook variable, and we're going to add a new workbook, and we're going to put it here. So once we create a new workbook, what we want to do is we want to copy our data sheet. Now that's the sheet we looked at earlier. So let's have a quick look at that guy again. And that's this. So that's food data. So it's basically just a group of food data. So food ID, the food type, serving size, and so on. And how we do it is we use cn data. So cn data is the worksheet name. And what we're going to do is just copy. So it's just a simple worksheet copy. And we want to copy it to the other workbook, which is wk_temp. So what we can do is we can say after, and we can say equals wk_temp. So that's the workbook, the temporary workbook we've created. And we want to copy it after the first workbook. So when we create another workbook, what happens is when we create a new workbook, it has one worksheet. So what we're saying is we want to put it after the first worksheet, and then what we're going to do is we're going to delete the first worksheet. So that will leave us with the food data worksheet simply. So to delete the worksheet, then it's just simply, we know it's still the first one, so it's temp and worksheets. So again, we refer to the first worksheet and then just delete. Now, when we try and delete in Excel, what it does is it brings us up an alert saying, are you sure you want to delete, or something along those lines. So just for this line, we want to turn off the alert. So we basically say alert display alert equals false. Then we delete the worksheet, and then what we do is we turn them back on again. So it's just for this line that we're turning them off, because we want to be notified if anything like this happens again. So if there's some other alert, we want to be notified. But just in this case, we're basically saying, okay, we know about this, so let's go ahead. So we've created the workbook, we've copied the worksheet into it, and we've deleted the sheet 1 worksheet. So now what we want to do is we just want to save this worksheet, this workbook, and we save it as the file name that we had already. So we save it, and then we close it, because we're going to send it now as an attachment. So we don't need it open anymore. We've copied the worksheet, it's in the workbook, we've saved it, we've named it. We just close it now, and then we send back the file name to our caller. So the best thing to do at this point is, if again we run it, and just make sure everything is going according to plan. So we click send email, and this brings us here. So I'm going to step over it now. So step over it is Shift F8, or we can use the icon at the top there. So we step over it. And if all has gone well, we should have a file name, and we have a file name which is there. But let's look in our actual folder and just make sure. So we have the food data file, you can see it here, and of course let's finish this off first. We'll finish out our code, and then we'll have a look in our food data spreadsheet, because we just want to make sure, we know that we've created it, but we just want to make sure that it's as we expect, and you can see that it is. It's got just one worksheet, and that's food data. So we've created our attachment, and what we've done then is we've passed it back. So now we have our recipients, we have our attachment. So now all we have left to do is the fun part, which is basically to send the email. So a lot of this code that we're going to use is code that you can use like typically anywhere that you want to send an email, because it's always going to be very similar, like more or less. So after we do, so we'll put in we'll do this code first. So basically, after we send the email, what we want to do is we want to delete the file. So we use kill, in other words, kill, and the full file name just deletes the actual file. So we do a check first that if the file name if the file name exists, so dir as file name checks the file exists. Now we could put code in here if it doesn't exist, to say if it doesn't exist, then there's an error or something. But when we're testing, there's sometimes it won't exist and sometimes it will. So it's just handy to put this code in there so that we're not always kind of getting stuck. Because sometimes we might like stop before it creates it, and then we might move the code along. So it's just handy to have this code in. So what we'll do then is we'll get to actually sending the email. So what I did was I created a module. So we create another module for sending the email. Now again, why we have this is because you can kind of think of it like a post office in real life. If you've got a town and you want to send a letter, you basically excuse me, so you basically go to the post office. And this is kind of a similar kind of logic, in that you have one place that you go to send the email, and it's in this module. So anytime you want to send the email, it's taken care of in here. So the opposite of this would be that you send your code everywhere to send the email, and that's, as I said at the start, that's something that you want to avoid. So we're going to create our sub here then, and we'll call it send email. And this is a sub because it isn't returning anything, so it's not giving a value back, and let's just call it from here. So send email. So we should be good to go once we have this written, once we have it written and it's working correctly. So send email then. So what we want to do is we want to use Outlook. So Outlook has its own library and that has the functionality. So we want to access that. So how we get it is we use tools and we use references. And then what we're looking for is Microsoft Outlook library. So down here, Microsoft and Outlook library. So you'll see it here, it's this one, 15 object library. Now once we have that, what we can do is we can do Outlook. So we create our variable like this, say our variable is Outlook, and we'll call this the Outlook application. Now this is what we're going to do. So this is what we're going to use to talk to the Outlook library. So we create a new one like this, and we say equals new Outlook application. Now, what's important here is that sometimes if you try and run this on a computer, so say for example you give this to a user, the user might not have Outlook installed, or they might have it installed but they mightn't be set up to use it, or there could be any number of problems with it. Now, if the user can't use Outlook, it's outside the scope of our application to try and fix that problem for us or for them. So we don't really want to know what the problem is. Essentially, if we can connect to Outlook, we know that the problem is serious and that the user has to get it installed, has to get set up, or has to get something. But at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to send an email. So once there's an error, we want to just say we can connect to Outlook, so we can't carry on. So what we do here is something that we don't normally do in our code, but we do it in specific circumstances, is we use on error resume next. Now, normally if there's an error, we have three different things that we use with on error with. So the default is on error go to 0. And what that means is if there's an error, the code stops on the line. So that's fine for when you're debugging. But the second one is on error go to, and we have some label. And that's what we use when we give the code to a user. So the idea is that if there's an error, the code will jump to a message and inform the user of the problem. But in this case, what we're basically saying is, if there's an error, carry on. Now the reason is, as I said, we don't particularly care what the error was. We're basically going to say, we're basically going to check Outlook anyway, and if Outlook evaluates to nothing, then we know that it didn't work. We couldn't connect to Outlook. So we're basically saying, try and connect to Outlook, ignore any errors, because we're going to check if this Outlook variable has something in it anyway. And if it doesn't work, we basically say to the user, we cannot create it and we're going to bail. So we're going to exit the sub. Now, if we exit the sub, so if we go to send sheet, so let's go back here. So we've got send mail here. If we exit the sub at this point, so we do the create attachment and we do send mail. Now, if we exit at this point, we come down here, we still carry on and we delete. So we check the file exists, we delete the file, and we turn back on the functionality. So in your code, it mightn't always be like that. It might be a bit trickier. It depends really what you're doing. But in this case, we're happy enough. If we can't connect to Outlook, we're just going to exit. Now you could have that code. Again, it depends what you're trying to do. You could have that code at the very start of an application if the user was doing a bit of stuff and you didn't want them to go ahead and do it unless you were sure at the start that Outlook existed. So the first thing in certain cases you might try is that, okay, does Outlook exist? And if it doesn't exist, then say, okay, we're not going to go any further. So it really depends on the nature of the application. So we know that that's fine. So what we do is we can put in a message box, and I'll just copy this rather than type it in, and the message box will tell us that okay, Outlook is here. So if it gets to here, we know that Outlook is installed on this PC. Now obviously it's installed on my PC, so let's do a send email, and we should get the message then telling us that. So this is just saying the file already exists, do you want to replace it? So that's just because we haven't deleted it, we don't delete the file as of yet. So Microsoft Outlook is installed on this PC. So we're happy enough so far. So all our checks, and as you can see, like as we go through this code, we're testing everything as we go along. We're building it in compartments, so we don't throw in a lot of code and then kind of see if it's working. Now what's also important is because it's in compartments, we don't have to worry about certain code messing up other code, because at each point we're checking to make sure that it's okay before it moves on to the next part. So in other words, if there's an error, we'll figure out that error pretty quickly, because somewhere in our code it'll say, hold on a second, we can't find Outlook, or we couldn't find any recipients. So this is probably, the next bit is probably the most complicated part of code that you see. So this is essentially just boilerplate code. So in other words, just standard code that we use, and we want to do it. We want to open the inbox so that we don't get security errors. So we use this code to do that. Now these things here, these are basically just what we call, I'll just put them in, or actually just below it. These are again just constants that we put in. And you see, the idea is that if we didn't use constants, we'd have numbers like 1 or 6. So instead of folder in inbox, we'd have the number 6. And you'd be kind of saying, okay, what does that even mean? But when you see that you've got a constant and it says OL folder inbox, it kind of makes the code readable, and you kind of get an idea of what it's about. And the same with OL minimize. So if we saw the number 1, it wouldn't make any difference. But when we say window state equals OL minimized, we can see straight away that, okay, it's doing something to minimize the window. Now what we want to do before that is, we've said already, on error resume next. So if there's an error, keep going. Now we don't want to do that any further. So once we're happy Outlook is okay, we want to go back to normal error handling. And so we say on error, go to EH. So EH is going to be a label we add, and we stick that down here at the end. So this is what you see kind of as standard in a VBA application. So if an error happens after that, say at this point, what happens is it will jump down to this line. So we can actually see that happening. So if we just do something like, we'll say dim I as long, and we'll say I equals 9 divided by 0. So divide by 0 error. And we'll run the code to get to here. And so I'm going to step over that line, and what you'll see is that the code will jump down to EH. So it jumped down there because we've turned this back on. If we didn't have this on, the code would just ignore that error and keep going. So it's important once we're finished with what we're doing that we turn our error handling back on. So now we're just about ready to send our email. We want to create the actual mail item. So again, what we do is we just create a mail item. So this is from Outlook. So this is the mail item. So the Outlook is to open the Outlook application. So Outlook mail item is then the actual mail item that we use to send the email. So let me just delete that there. So sorry, Eric, you were saying, what is the scope of on error resume next? Just the next line of code. Yeah. So on error resume next is basically this sub. So it'll keep going until this sub ends. Once this sub ends, it goes back to the default. So it's basically saying if there's an error, resume next until the end of the sub, and then once it ends the sub, it loses it. Or as we've done here, we've changed the type of error handling. So there's 3 types of error handling, and it's always in one of the states. So it's either going to stop on the line, it's going to ignore the error, or it's going to jump to a label. So it's always in one of those states. So if we change it, it's now in the next state. And if we change it to resume next again, it's in that state. And when it exits the sub, it goes back to the default state that was outside the stub. So whatever the state was outside the sub. So that's essentially how it works. So we've created the mail item. So again, we do Outlook Outmail. So we've created, so this is basically just saying that it's I just wondered, yeah, I think this is I'm just checking there if I have a const for this, because VBA has constants for certain things, which is very handy. So we create the mail item, and then we're saying we want a mail item of this type, because you can get different types of ones. You can get like different calendar items or requests and certain things. Let me just see the definition of this. Yeah, we actually have them. So this is quite good. So it's always good when VBA has its own built-in constants that we can use. So here you can see that there's an appointment item, there's a contact item, there was a journal item, a mobile items, a SMS, post item, task item, and so on. So these are the different ones we can create. And now once we create them, this is like essentially then we're creating a normal email. What we want to do is we want to just set the recipients, we want to set the to, we want to set the body, and so on. So with this sub, what we're going to do is we're going to just set it like this, so that our send mail, basically anywhere we call send mail, we always want to give it a recipient, subject, body, and attachment. Now it doesn't have to have an attachment, but or any of these, I mean, they can be blank, but anywhere we call a send email, these are basically the standard parameters. Now if we do debug compile, it will complain because send email obviously doesn't have the values that we were describing there. So let me just debug compile. So subber function not defined, and I think that's because, let me just go here, send mail, because yeah, I just have it called send email. So send a mail, and then you can see that it has the different items here. So as we go through it, it shows us the parameters. So even though we've created this ourselves, it still gives us the parameters that we need. So we need call, we need a subject. So let's just call it test subject. We can put it now normally. So if we want to use the send mail anywhere, we can pass it any subject we want, and we don't have to rewrite this code again. Anywhere we want to send an email, we can just call send email. So that's why it's so useful just to have one place that does this, rather than copying and pasting this code everywhere. So the body text, again, we'll just say test body. And then the final thing that we have is the attachment. So what we pass to the attachment is basically the file name. And then the send mail will look after doing this for us. So let's debug compile. So if we go back into our send mail, what we're going to do is we're going to just start with the easy stuff first. So let's do the to. So all we have to do to set the to, or sorry, we'll leave the to just for one moment. Let's set the subject. So all we do is assign it to the subject that we're passing in. And the same with the body, it's just email assignment. So the body again is just assigned to sbody. So that's pretty straightforward. Now the recipient is a bit trickier because it's a collection. Now the disadvantage of using the array as reading from the worksheet was that if there's only one recipient, you basically have to create the array, so it's messy. But the disadvantage of using the collection is that it's messy at the other end, because we could just basically make the array into, we could just join it and create a string from it in just one line. Whereas with the collection, we need to do a bit more stuff with it. So this is our recipient string. So this is going to have all the recipients, and they're separated by semicolons. So let me do out mail, and this is just, again, it's just going to be a string, and it's going to just be 2. So 2 is what we have here, and we're just going to assign that to srecip. So now we just need to get all the different values, and we say basically for each, actually sorry, let me just, that's a string, and also s2. So recip is just what we're reading each time. So let me just make that as a string as well. So s2 goes here, and then we say for each recip in our collection, and then we do a next. And what we want to do is we want to add it to our string, and we want to add a semicolon to it as well. So again, I have plus there. It doesn't matter in this case. It's probably better to use just to be in the habit of using ampersand, but it doesn't really matter that much. And so on. And so that will just build a string. And then of course at the end, what we need to do is we need to remove the last semicolon. And so we're basically saying, give us the left of this whole thing. So we want all the characters to the left minus 1. So in other words, the leftmost characters, all the leftmost characters except 1, and that basically gets rid of the last value. And then all we've got left to do is the attachment. But let's just run it to here and just see what we have so far. So let's compile. So variable not defined, and that's because it's called recip. So let's put that guy in here, and then debug compile again. And sRecip needs to be a variant. So when you use for each, it has to be a variant. Even though we know it's going to be a string, we still have to specify it as being a variant. Now again, we do a compile and sBody text, and so it's good now. So let's do a send email here. So yeah, you can ignore this. So this is basically saying the file already exists, because we haven't been deleting it so far because we've been stopping the code. So our subject is test subject. Our body text is going to be test body. So what about 2? How does that look? And you can see that it has the recipient there. So it has Paul in it. So Paul at excelmacromastery.com. So it has the recipient in it correctly. And so it all worked so far. So let's go to the final part, which is adding the attachment. So the attachment is actually a collection itself. So it's kind of a collection itself. So when we want to add it, what we have to do is we add it kind of similarly, in that we could use a for loop to go through, but in our case we just have one attachment, so we don't need to worry too much about this. But if we had multiple attachments, what we would do is break the line up into, so say we had attachments that we were passing them as a string separated by semicolons. So we'd have to break them up and we'd add them one by one. So what I mean by this is that when you see Outmail, you can see that it has attachments collection, and we add to the collection like this. Now in this case, as I said, we're just adding the one. And so this will just add to the collection. So as I said, it's a collection here, so we can add as many attachments as we want. So again, let's run we'll debug compile, always a good thing to do. So we're happy with that. We'll click on send email now to run it. And we'll step over this line. If the attachment equals, so our attachment has something in it, it has the file name. So we add it, and now we're ready to send. So let's just add the send line here while we're good to go. So outmail send is simply the line to send. And let me just set this as the next line. And it gets sent, and then we exit the sub. So now if I check my inbox, I should have received an email. And indeed I have 2103, at least Irish time, 2103. And you can see that I have test body, test subject, food data. So yeah, you can see that it was sent from Paul at Expert Database Solutions. So that's just the email, the name of my limited company. So that's why it says that on it. So that is pretty much it all wrapped up. But what we want to see as well is, we want to just make sure that we're deleting the file correctly. So when we look in our, let me go back in here. So okay, the workbook we've created isn't here. but we just want to make sure that we're actually creating it and deleting it. So let's just send the email. Now it's going to stop on the line before we delete it. So at this point, that line should be alive here, or that file should be alive here. You can see it's food data. So the file is still alive. Now, when we go down here, we're going to kill it now. And you see that it'll just disappear. So we know that it works. Now, in a lot of cases, when you're sending an email like this, so it depends again on the application. If these are just reports you're sending all the time, it mightn't be a big deal. But sometimes what you might want to do is create an archive. So what you do is you copy that file somewhere and just put a timestamp on it. So like the minute, the hour, the date and the day and the date and whatever. And then you'd have a timestamp. So you could just copy it to some archived folder or something like that. So that'd be kind of a typical thing that you do in VBA. So that's essentially what we have. So one more thing actually that I always like to do, and that is just to put a text message at the end to say that the email has happened. So you want to inform the user that there's been no errors. So again, always good. What you never want to do is you never want your application to run and it looks like nothing happens. Because if you see that application again, if you come to that for the first time in a month, you're just going to wonder what's going on and you're going to have to debug it. And it's the same if you've given that to a user and they run it. It could run fine. So say there's just no recipients, or it just runs fine but nothing happens. Sometimes the user will get back to you and think, or say like, I don't think this ran correctly because I didn't see anything happening and I'm not sure if it did. But if you give them a message, if there's a message at the end that says that it worked, then the user knows that it's gone according to plan. Because if it hasn't gone according to plan, it shouldn't have got this far. So once it says the email has been successfully sent, you can see that something has happened. Because if you click a button and it just happens instantly, it may appear that nothing has happened at all. So the email has been successfully sent. So the person is happy. They can check their email box then, just to make sure that it has been sent. And so that's essentially that application. So Matthew, you're just asking about ByRef and ByVal. Yeah, let me create a new workbook here. And I'll just explain what those are. So let me just create a module here. We'll just call it just any module. So this one, we're going to just have test, and an inner test, we're going to just do stuff. And that's going to be a variable. So we're going to pass this variable ByVal, and the variable is going to be total, we'll call it, as long. And what we're going to do with total is we're going to multiply it by 2. So total equals total plus 2. So let's start off with ByRef, because ByRef is the default. So if we don't have ByRef, if we don't mention ByRef or ByVal, it's going to be ByRef. So if we declare a variable like this, we'll actually call it total as well. It doesn't have to be the same name. So we declare a variable like this, and we say do stuff dot total, do stuff total, and then let's debug print the total out, and we'll print that out here. So what that will actually give us back is 2, because it will add 2. So it starts with 0 and it adds 2. So let me actually just put even a value in it. So it's always 2, but let me just put a value in it just so that it's really, really clear. So we have 10 in total. Now, when we step through the code like this, and this is complaining that should be long, and we step through the code like this, so total now you can see has 10 in it. We step into here and we add 2 to total, and then we step back out, and total now is 12. So essentially what ByRef is doing is ByRef is given is basically given the address of the variable. So it's essentially using the same variable. But what by val does is, by val basically creates a copy of the variable. So when we change it in here, it won't affect the value outside. So you can see the value here is 10. And we go in here and the value of total is 12. But when we come back out here, this total in the original is still 10. And so, in other words, by val is basically making our variable read only, in that we can change. It's making the original read only, so we can change the value inside, but it doesn't affect the one outside. So normally when we pass a variable, if we pass a common variable like a long or a string or anything, we normally always make it by val, because we don't want it to be changed inside a sub. And the reason is because it's very difficult to detect. When we pass something in, we don't expect it to be changed. So it's like a parameter you pass to Excel. You don't expect the original parameter to be changed. So if it does get changed, it's quite a tricky one to track down. So we usually make it by val just to prevent it happening by accident. So I hope that makes sense. So yeah, Tomek, you said that as well. Passing, yeah, exactly. Passing by val, you pass a copy, and by ref, you're basically pointing. So you're passing an address of it. Yeah, you're welcome. No problem at all. So yeah, so that concludes the send email application. And as I said, the code is quite useful, because pretty much any application that you're going to use emails in, you can pretty much use the email part of this. You know, the code is going to be pretty much the same. Just one thing, just one word of warning, and this goes back to what I've mentioned before to do with the early and late binding. So let us go back to send sheet here. So when we do this here, it's what's called early binding. So we got the reference at the start. So remember, we did tools and references and got the reference. So this is called early binding, and it's pretty good because we can see basically the properties. So we can do Outlook, and we can see the properties of Outlook and what it has and so on. So it's quite useful. Now, if we give this application to somebody else, sometimes the reference files get mixed up, or there's a problem, or you need the user to add it. So it can get a bit messy. So what we do is what we call late binding. And in this case, we say basically, we declare Outlook as just an object, and then at runtime, we create the object. So why this is different is that it's basically talking to the Outlook library on the machine at runtime. So when you actually run it, and it's basically saying, it's doing it under the hood, but it's basically interrogating it and saying, do you have this? Do you have that? So generally speaking, it will work. So it's more stable. If you give it to a user, generally speaking, it's more stable. So my normal rule of thumb is, when you're developing, you use the early binding with the reference, because you have access to the IntelliSense. And then when you give it to a user, you basically always use late binding, because otherwise you tend to just have problems. A lot of, like, it'll probably work on 90% of users, but there's always going to be one machine or one user or one version of Excel that it just won't work on. And so it's easy just to make it as an object. So Mark, yeah, you're saying, yeah, I'm going to put this up on Gumroad to the video packages. So it'll be in the premium packages, or if you've purchased any of the video packages, I'll be adding it to this. So hopefully the sound and all is okay. I know at the start, I don't know what happened. My connection got loose, and then when I put it back in, it didn't work, and I had to reboot the Wirecast, which is the software that encodes it, and so that's what kind of caused the problem. So, but hopefully apart from that, the quality was good, and once we got up and running, I think it wasn't too bad. So if you have any further questions, go ahead and ask. I'm going to be here for the next few minutes anyway. And also, I'll be leaving it up here for 24 hours. So if you don't have the video packages and you want to watch the replay, it's going to be left up here for 24 hours anyway, so you can watch it at your leisure. So yeah, by Val, it's a good question by Val and by Ref. It's the question I get the most, I think, from people. Because it's quite subtle, and the thing is, when you have a collection and an object, they have to be by Ref, so you can't really have them as by Val. You can have them as you can have a collection as by Val and by Ref. I think one of them you can have as by Ref and by Val, but the difference is really, really subtle when when you pass them that way. Okay, you're welcome, Tomek. Good night to you as well. Yeah, you're welcome, Matthew. No problem. And Mark. And everyone else, actually. Thanks, everyone, for coming along. If you have any questions now, feel free to ask them. I'm going to be here for the next few minutes anyway. Would you would you comment out early binding or leave them both in? Yeah, you do comment them out, because otherwise you'll have to have different names. What people tend to do is something like this, is that you basically say something like this: if debugging. So you use this hash if thing here. So if you have something like this, so if debugging, so we'll say if debugging like this equals 1, then we'll use this, and otherwise we'll use this. So I'll show you what debugging is in a second. So we do else here, and then at the end we do end if. So what this basically means is that only one of these gets defined. It's not like a normal if statement, only one gets defined. So how we define it is we go into tools and we go into project properties, and here, oh yeah, I actually have one here already. So we say, let's use early binding then. So we say early binding equals 1. So if we do it like this, so in other words, we're saying, okay, we're going to use early binding, and when we're developing our code, and then when we've finished our code, we can just go back in here and we can just set this to 0 or delete it, and it will use the late binding. Now, the thing is, this is different than a normal if statement in that it will only ever use one of these sets of code. So as far as VBA is concerned, it's either using this code or it's using that code. Now, if this is a bit too complex, I mean, you can just comment out the code as well. So whatever you prefer. Yeah, Robert, if you're sending more than one attachment, yeah, you'd use a for each loop, because you are a for I loop, whatever, because yeah, you want to add each one at a time. So you might be able to actually, I'm not sure if you could actually set that set. Let me just check this. So set attachment, you might be able to set it. I'm not sure if it's a true collection. So set attachments equals to collection. So let's just see if this, yeah, like, so I wonder, will it give me the definition here? It might give me the definition here. So attachments has attachments. Yeah, it's not quite a true collection, but you might get away with assigning it like this to a collection, but then you'd have to add the value to the collection anyway. So yeah, you basically, if you want to split up the attachments, you basically have to do a for loop and add them kind of one at a time. Yeah, no problem, Irvin, you're welcome. Eric, you had a question. Yes, any opinion on using collections versus dictionaries? Yes, I have a lot of opinions. The collection in VBA, is kind of half finished. So it has keys and it has other stuff that were never properly implemented. So all you really can do with a collection is you can add items to the collection and you can remove items from the collection and you can loop through the collection. So it doesn't have a lot of functionality, and people find it very frustrating because when you come from, if you use another language like C# or something, or Java, a collection like that, you have lots of stuff where you can remove all items, you can sort items, you can do a lot of stuff with it, and you basically get them for free, whereas the collection doesn't have any of that functionality. Now there's a way of using the C# array list, and the array list is actually a collection basically, but it's a collection with a lot. It works the same way as a collection, but it's way better functionality, and you can even convert it to an array, and you can do like lots of stuff with it. So that's what I tend to use, the array list. But the dictionary actually is very, very useful, because what the dictionary has is it has a key, so it allows you to reference an item straight away. So for example, if you were collecting, say you were reading through fruit and you were keeping a count of each one, at any point you can basically just reference the fruit by its name. So you can say, okay, how many apples have I, and just use apple. Whereas with a collection, you have to read through the collection one item at a time to get to apple and see what the value was. So that's why. So basically, there's times to use the collection and there's times to use the dictionary. And if you have if there's an application where you're going to keep referencing items, and a good example is if you're summing totals, then a dictionary is very, very useful. So if you want to find an item quickly, the dictionary is useful. If you're just adding a lot of items together, then the collection is useful for that. But again, it's slow if you want to find an item because you have to read through it. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, good stuff, Eric. Good stuff. Okay, if there's no more questions, then I leave it there. I leave this up for 24 hours, so you can just go to the very same link, and it'll be just here live for the next 24 hours, or not live, but available. And then I'll add it to Gumroad and to the video packages for the VBA handbook. You're welcome, John. I hope your sound and everything. I hope that worked out for you in the end, the sound and everything. So if you have any further questions or think of something later, just drop me an email at paul@excelmacromastery.com, and I'll do my best to reply. So. You're welcome, Screenberry. You're welcome. Glad you liked it. .com. So my email is Paul. So that's my email there. If you have any questions, you're welcome, Mark. No problem at all. Okay, everyone. Good night. Have a good night, and I'll send out an email. So I think I should be going ahead. Next week, I'll probably do application 4, all going well. I think I should be clear enough to do it. I'll send out an email next week anyway, and let everyone know.